Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about two different topics, the Pipeline Pilot Initiative and the Round 10 Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit Application. Today we have two presenters with us. We have Nathaniel Kalin from the Ohio Development Services Agency. He's the Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program Manager there. And we have Barb Powers. She's the head of the Inventory and Registration Department of the Ohio Historic Preservation Office. Now, before we get started, I just want to go over a couple things about today's webinar. First off, we're going to be taking questions in two different categories, partway and at the end. So the first section that we're going to cover, we're going to talk about it, answer questions, then we're going to move on to the second part, answer those questions at the end. So if you have any questions at any time about anything that's going on, just type them into the chat box and we'll get them answered when we take our breaks to answer those questions. Second, if you have any problems today with the webinar software, the best thing you can do is close the webinar program down, click the link that was sent to you, and open it back up. That'll solve 99% of your problems. So if the sound starts sounding funny, slides aren't moving how you think they should be moving, just close it down and restart that program. Same thing goes if you're on the telephone. Just hang up, call the number that was provided to you, and we'll get that started again. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over, and we're going to be talking about the Pilot Initiative.
All right. Well, thanks, Devin. Thanks again to Heritage Ohio for the invitation to talk about the program today. I think this would be our first presentation about the Pipeline Pilot Initiative, so that's exciting for us. And Devin tells me there's 88 people on the other side of the webinar, so that means one person from every county, I guess. So, we'll go ahead and get through this. So first we're going to just go do a little overview of the Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit in general for those who are new or not aware of the program. Then we're going to talk about a new initiative that our office and the Ohio Historic Preservation Office have launched to really help people access the program, go through the types of projects that are applicable under that program, that a new initiative, the application process, and the National Register Questionnaire, which is kind of a crucial component to that whole process. We'll break for questions at that point, specifically about the pipeline, and then we'll launch in, and I'll talk about the Round 10 application, the larger round for the Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit, which actually came out this morning, so many of you should have gotten an email about that application. We'll go over some of the components and then the scoring. All right. So the Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit, or OHPTC, I probably will a couple of times slip and call it OPTIC, the acronym today, but it's a 25% tax credit given to owners and long-term lessees. That's a new addition to the program, long-term lessees, long-term tenants, able to access the program to encourage them to rehabilitate historic buildings. It's a competitive program. It can be used with the federal tax credit, which is a 20% credit, but a little different from the federal program. You submit a competitive application prior to undertaking the rehabilitation. After you get it approved, then you move forward with the project. My office, the Office of Redevelopment, which is inside the Ohio Development Services Agency, formerly the Ohio Department of Development, has two key partners we work with in the program, the Ohio Historic Preservation Office, or OHPO. And they kind of have two roles. They review eligibility of buildings to ensure that they are a historic building. And we'll talk a little bit about what a historic building means for this program a little bit later. They also review the rehabilitation plans to confirm that they do meet the Federal Secretary of Interior's standards for rehabilitation, and that's the same review that happens for federal tax credit projects. We also work, of course, because it's a tax credit, with the Ohio Department of Taxation, who performs the function of granting the tax credit after a certificate is issued. All right, so what types of buildings do we work with? We really, besides single-family housing, which is an eligible activity under the program, which we haven't really done too much with yet, we really kind of run the gamut from skyscrapers to 2- and 3-unit apartment buildings. There's a rural bed and breakfast in the program. A lot of buildings in kind of mid-sized, smaller county seats, and then just a ton of stock in our big urban, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus, that kind of thing. So we have over 150 projects approved today. I think 157 is the total number, and we'll likely approve another 20 to 30 in this upcoming round. So first we're going to talk about the Pipeline Pilot Initiative, and this was announced in December. We announced it up in Cleveland when we announced the Round 9 Optic Awards. But it's a new program. Again, it's a partnership between our office and OHPO to provide technical assistance and small grants, basically to help property owners and communities prepare historic properties for rehabilitation projects. And so our goal is really to create a pipeline, create a flow of projects that are eligible to compete for optic funding. So, it's kind of a crucial component to be a historic building for optic. You have to be a historic building at the time that you apply. So nominating buildings, nominating potential historic districts that you want to target for redevelopment is really a good first step, a good activity to advance rehabilitation when a developer is ready to proceed with the project. So the building's already listed, they can move forward. We budgeted $90,000 for the 18-month pilot. So the pilot, we're hoping to get the application out here towards the end of February, and it'll run through summer 2014. So kind of 18 months starting last month, but hopefully the pilot will be successful and we'll be able to extend the program beyond that. All right, so what is a historic building? And this means a lot of different things to different people, but for the optic program, it means that the property would meet any of the 5 basically designations listed here. So it could be individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It could contribute to a National Register Historic District, or it could contribute to an NPS, a National Park Service Certified Historic District. And in Ohio, I think maybe there's 7 of these, all in Cincinnati and Cleveland. So not a big percentage of our buildings qualify this way, but that is there. And those 3, top 3 that are in those red brackets, that's what will qualify a building for the federal historic program as well. But in Ohio, with the Ohio credit, a building that's locally designated by a certified local government, I think there's 56 of these currently in Ohio, but this is a designation granted by OHPO and the National Park Service that basically recognizes that there's a local historic preservation ordinance, preservation commission, those kind of things in place. If a local community is a CLG, they can designate a local building as a landmark, or they can also create local historic districts, and if a building contributes to that, it would be eligible for the program as well. But if a property only has CLG designation, does not have the hope of the National Register, it's not eligible for the federal program. So with the pipeline, we're really focusing on the National Register. It's our goal to get properties listed on the National Register so they qualify for both credits, because we really feel that you need both of those incentives to propel redevelopment. All right, so I'm going to start off talking about some of the project types you can do, and then Barb Powers is going to pick up the second portion. These are all explained in detail in the application, which again should come out towards the end of the month. But there's 4 project types. We call them type A, B, C, and D. Type A is pretty straightforward. It's a National Register nomination for an individual building. It would be a grant of up to $4,000, which you could use to hire a consultant, basically to do the research, field work, actually prepare the nomination to list a building on the National Register. If the applicant is not the building owner, we would require them to basically designate that they support the project. A type B project would be very similar, but it's a National Register nomination for a historic district. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept of what a historic district would be. It'd be a collection of buildings. Maybe it's a downtown or a piece of a downtown or a neighborhood business district. That'd be a grant of up to $8,000 for the same type of expenses. And it could be to create a new historic district or to amend a district. So you may need to change a district, or want to look at it changing a district because buildings were left out, or the period of significance is limiting, or for some reason like that. In these cases, you'd have to have support of the majority of property owners going into it, into the application. We'd also want you to have the local jurisdiction, the city or the village the project is located in, to support the project as well. So at this point, I'm going to let Barb talk about the other two project types.
Okay, thank you, Nathaniel. Barbara Powers here. I want to say good afternoon to everyone participating in the webinar, and I also want to thank Heritage Ohio for hosting this webinar and for inviting me to be a part of it. Also, on behalf of the Ohio Historic Preservation Office, I want to express how excited we are about this pipeline initiative to help assist with the preparation of National Register nominations and amendments. I want to mention a little bit about historic district amendments. In Ohio, we have over almost 520 historic districts listed in the National Register. And over time, some of those districts do have periods of significance that can be re-examined, or boundaries that can be re-examined from when they were first nominated and finalized. So we are seeing a great deal of interest in those, and that's not an insignificant project to undertake, we realize. So this is funding that might come in very handy for addressing some of those types of situations. But I want to talk about the Project C type of pipeline project. And that's a situation where, as you can see from the photographs on your screen, you may own a building that's listed in a historic district, or you may have a building that's not currently designated through the National Register, and it's a building that's had some changes to it, or it's a building that has some non-historic covering or alteration to it, but through some investigation you've determined that there is historic materials and details hiding beneath that non-historic covering or alterations. So this type of pipeline project funding is geared towards providing some funding up to $8,000 for the actual brick and mortar activities that would remove the non-historic material and reveal intact historic materials. Now, I'm going to jump a little ahead in explaining this type to some of the information that will be required to meet this type of project, type C. One, the applicant will need to have, either through a National Register questionnaire, an indication that the property does have integrity issues and would not qualify currently in its current appearance for the National Register or contribute to a historic district, or have an indication from the Ohio Historic Preservation Office that the property is indicated as a non-contributing building within a National Register listed district. Then we're going to want to see information that you have an indication that there is actually historic material somehow being covered up, that it does exist, and then detailed specifications on how you will be removing the non-historic material and how that work will meet the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. Lastly, we are requesting that you have some type of photographic, historic photos, documentation to show the historic appearance of the building, because you may have a building that historically was a 4-story building. Now your building is 1 story with some large plate glass display windows. So the likelihood of it being returned to a 4-story building could be questionable. Could be questionable as to whether this type of pipeline project is going to qualify. The last pipeline project type is type D, and this is where funding could be given towards creating and doing a multiple property documentation cover form, a historic context. And DSA is adding this, including this type of project type in the offerings for the pipeline, because on occasion we do see this type of situation where identifying and getting properties successfully listed in the National Register may really be benefited by having a multiple property documentation form prepared. It could be a situation in a community where a city is trying to identify and hopefully nominate a good number of buildings that cover a big area of their downtown, or a large concentration of a certain type of property, like maybe historic school buildings. And then really, in order to understand why how this property type is significant, how these properties qualify for the National Register, the most beneficial tool would be to prepare a multiple property type documentation approach. We certainly don't see this as probably the #1 and most often use of the pipeline projects, but as I said, it's a type that's been added. We'll see what kind of interest there is and what kind of viability there is for using this money for this type of project. It would also require an indication from our office that this would be the preferred and recommended method to approaching National Register listing.
Okay, I'm going to jump back in here for a second. The pipeline application process specifically, it's a two-part process. One is the National Register Questionnaire, and I think Barb talked a little bit about that for C and D. With A and B, you would submit that. Potentially, you could submit it concurrently with the application that you would submit to development, but she's going to explain the National Register Questionnaire a little bit more after the next 2 slides. Our application to development, it's going to have basically 4 major components. We're going to ask you to give a project budget, and that is the budget for the nomination process or the brick and mortar integrity investigation project. That's not the later rehab. The same with the description that we'd be asking for. We'd ask you to document the property owner's support for the project types that have those requirements, the jurisdiction support for the historic district nomination. And then really the key of our review at development is going to be the redevelopment potential narrative. And that's where we're going to ask you to make the case that the property or the properties, if it's a district, have the potential for redevelopment using the OPTIC program, using federal and state historic tax credits for commercial or multifamily housing redevelopment, not multifamily house, but we're really looking at those types of uses that are going to generate job creation, so a commercial, retail, office, hotel, those type of uses, or a multifamily complex is really what we're looking for. We wouldn't necessarily want to list, say, a church that was going to remain a church, or a district of single-family homes that was going to remain primarily owner-occupied residential, but we're looking for those downtowns, maybe warehouse-type areas. There's really commercial redevelopment potential. So. Looking at the funding determinations, how we're going to select applications. Basically, once we have a complete application, they'll be put in queue and funded first come, first serve. So the idea here is that when you have a project that's ready to go, you can move quickly, you don't have to wait for a round, but you'll be funded based on funding availability. And then secondly, at that second bullet point there, because we want to reach as many communities as we can with the initiative, at least with the pilot, we're only going to fund 1 application from a jurisdiction, so a city, a village, a township, every 2 consecutive quarters. So every 6 months we'd fund from a city. Unless we got to the end of the year and we had extra funds, we may go through and fund more. But it's really our priority to bring a lot of communities to the table through the program. If an application is not funded because we're out of money for that year, or because of the jurisdiction location, we'll keep it or retain it for 6 months in the event that funding does become available, and then we'll contact the project again. And development, our department reserves the right basically to not approve an application if we don't think it has that sufficient commercial or multifamily housing redevelopment potential. So as you're putting together an application, definitely be talking with my office, myself, to see if we think it's going to be a property that's going to qualify. And then you want to be talking with the Historic Preservation Office, of course, about the questionnaire, which will lead into that process.
Okay, back to me. National Register questionnaires. This is a document, a tool that the Ohio Historic Preservation Office created a number of years ago. And the idea in its creation was to create a document that would enable people to just tell us what they know about their historic property or historic area, so that we could give them an initial indication of whether or not we think the property in question or the district in question would be a good candidate and is going to qualify to be successfully nominated to the National Register. It's not intended to be a full-blown draft of a National Register nomination. It's designed to just provide basic information about the property, and as we'll see in a moment, it kind of walks you through understanding and thinking about the essential ingredients that make up a National Register nomination. National Register questionnaires, as they come into the Ohio Historic Preservation Office, we have a team of members of our office staff, actually a member from each of our department areas and program areas, as well as all of the National Register staff members. We review the questionnaires weekly, and then our goal is to have a pretty quick turnaround to get back to the applicant in writing what the team is recommending. So we try to get those responses back to folks within a week or 2 weeks after the questionnaire has been reviewed. We do provide written responses, one indicating thumbs up that the property looks like it would be successful if it were nominated to the National Register. We'll give guidance on what criteria we think the nomination should focus on. We'll give some additional guidance on maybe some of the emphasis and things to particularly cover in the nomination. And we'll also include our actually now new and improved National Register instruction CD, which gives all the instructions and guidance and information on preparing National Register nominations, and a copy of the new National Register nomination form by the National Park Service. If, based on the questionnaire, we think we can't make a good decision and give you a good direction to go and we need some more information, we'll get back to you quickly and ask for that additional information. It may need a photo of the interior or just a clarification of some aspect of about the property. And then we would go from there to respond again after we have that information. If, based on the information we've been given through the questionnaire, we really feel, in our opinion and experience, that this property is not going to be successfully nominated, we're going to tell you that right up front, and we're going to tell you why. We'll explain if we think it's because it has integrity issues, or if the information that's presented about the history of it just doesn't seem as though it's going to successfully meet the criteria and be able to be nominated. So you'll know up front without, again, a great deal of expenditure of time, effort, and research. The National Register questionnaires are located on our website at ohiohistory.org under the Historic Preservation Office. And we now have an individual property National Register questionnaire, and we've designed a questionnaire for historic districts. As I mentioned, questionnaires are really meant to get at the beginnings of helping you think about what it takes and what kind of information is required to nominate a property to the National Register. And there's 3 main ingredients that you're trying to cover. One is age. Typically, properties or areas have a predominant properties dating to 50 years or older to qualify for the National Register. So we're in the 60s, almost mid-60s, 1960s. 1963 is that 50-year cutoff. So that's one ingredient, age. Properties that are less than 50 years old may qualify and be listed in the National Register. They have to have what's considered exceptional significance. And that gets us to the significance. Properties have to meet one or more of the National Register criteria for evaluation. That is the National Register's means of judging and determining significance. And they focus on properties that reflect broad patterns of history or reflect single events of significance, are associated with important people, associated with communities or the history and development of areas, have architectural significance, either through their building type or style or method of construction, or have yielded important information. Typically those properties are archaeological in nature, but buildings in some cases can qualify under that last criterion as well. And lastly, properties have to have integrity. In other words, they have to be able to physically convey through their physical characteristics, materials, design, workmanship, location, why they are significant. So the National Register, a property has to have all three of these components to be able to be successfully nominated. And I'm just going to walk very quickly through the National Register questionnaire. This is a copy of the questionnaire for individual properties. And as I said, it focuses right up front on those three components. So if you're able to answer yes to those first three questions on the questionnaire, things are looking good. You can proceed and provide us with a little bit more information. We do encourage that you provide us with floor plans for an individual building. And as I've said, these floor plans can be copies of floor plans or they can be rough sketches. Again, we're just trying to get a sense of the interior space and arrangements and see if it appears from a floor plan that it retains integrity. Then the questionnaire basically just walks you through each of the National Register criteria, asking you some key questions that you can provide, hopefully some very simple basic information about the property to help answer them. Eligibility for the National Register only requires one criteria, so don't feel as though you have to answer every one of these. Look through them and figure out which one you think your property most clearly identifies with and concentrate on providing that type of information. In addition to responding to more information about the history of the property, the questionnaire asks some questions about what the building looks like, how it's been altered or changed over time, what the nature of those alterations are. These are key questions to help us be able to respond regarding integrity. Remember to include photographs of the interior of the buildings, because for an individual nomination, we're dealing with the entire building is being nominated, not just the front of the building or not just the exterior. We've just completed a questionnaire that's, I hope, a little more helpful to help people think about historic districts. It's the same format as the individual, but we do gear the questions so that you can think about the historic district overall as an entirety and focus on the history and significance of the area of the district, of the downtown commercial district, or of the mixed-use residential commercial district. We do include or ask that you include a sketch map. This, again, doesn't have to be the full-blown map that would be submitted with a National Register nomination, but we want to be able to, when we look at these, get a sense of what you think the boundaries of your historic district are, and then what kind of a mix we have of buildings that add to the significance of the district or buildings that are newer or have been significantly altered and therefore would not contribute to the district. We also ask for photographic coverage at this point too, and please include images of the buildings that help us see, again, the relationship of buildings to one another and to the street, and also help us understand what the real standout buildings are, as well as some of those buildings that have been altered.
All right, so with that, we're going to pause for a second in case there's any questions about the pipeline specifically. Again, we're expecting to have that application out towards the end of the month, but if you're interested in the program, you can go ahead and start working on the questionnaire now. Additionally, you may want to give me a call. Let's put you on my radar so you're in the pipeline for the pipeline, so to speak. But it looks like we've got a couple questions. So.
All right. Let's answer both these since there's only two right now, but if you have any more questions in the pipeline, just send them now. First question is from Greg, asking about the tax credit. Can it be used on a museum?
Potentially. The answer's a little complicated, but there's not a specific prohibition for museums. It would depend on how you set up the ownership structure. I don't think we have a museum project today, although we have several institutional projects. So if you have a project you're talking about, my contact information's on the end of the slide. Feel free to give me an email or a call. We can talk about it specifically, but there's a way to probably approach that.
And the second question is from Lori. Where can people obtain the CD on National Register nominations that Barb was referring to?
Well, that CD of National Register instructions is available through our office, the Ohio Historic Preservation Office. And as I mentioned, we send those out when we receive National Register questionnaires for people. If you are working on a National Register nomination and for some reason you don't have the CD, please contact our office. You can ask for either myself or Susan Tietz or Megan Rupnick, and we can be sure to get you a copy of that.
All right.
All right. Sounds good. All right, so now we'll jump into talking about the Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit application for Round 10. I'm specifically going to talk about the application that goes to the Department of Development, or the Development Services Agency now, not as much about the rehabilitation plans, the Part 1, the Part 2 that would go to the Ohio Historic Preservation Office. But that application and the policies for the round have been posted online at the web address on your screen. They were posted yesterday. The timeline for this round, we'll have applications due on April 2nd. So we usually take applications by March 31st, but that's Easter Sunday this year, so we bumped you out, gave you 2 days there as a little Easter present, I guess. But we'll review applications April 3rd through June 18th. There'll be a curing process, so if there's any issues with documentations, questions that we have, we'll send you a letter requesting additional documentation and give you a couple weeks to respond. And the awards will be announced on or before June 30th of this year. So by summer, this process will be through, and we'll be ramping up for round 11, which will take applications at the end of September of this year. Round 10, just like all the rounds in this new re-upped program, starts with a base of $30 million. We have $60 million each year to allocate, so this is half of that. And the application and self-score sheet document are now one fillable PDF. So in the past, you may remember you got a PDF, and in the old days you got a Word document and an Excel document. Now that Excel document, those contents are within the fillable PDF. It's all in one place, hopefully easier to use. Thinking about some of the components, there is a required pre-application meeting with both our office, the Office of Redevelopment, it will likely be with me, and the Ohio Historic Preservation Office, which is going to want to talk about your Part 2, Part 1. There's an application fee. It's set on a sliding scale based on the amount of tax credits that you're requesting, between $50 and $2,000. Applicants are required to submit 2 hard copies of the application within a binder with tabs, and that's explained in the application, and just 1 digital copy. In the past, we required 2 digital copies, but that was ended up being redundant. So we're just asking for 1 now, and that'll be submitted on the CD-ROM. There's 3 sections to the application, and I'll go through each of those, particularly the scoring criteria. A is just looking at eligibility of the application. B is looking at the rehabilitation information. It's really where you verify that you're doing the things that you need to be doing with the OHPO to development. Section C, again, is the scoring criteria. There's a 100-point scoring criteria that applications compete on. So that's a really crucial part of the application to understand to maximize your score and competitiveness. So Section A we'll go through kind of quickly, but A1 would be a declaration from the authorized representative of the applicant. So the entity that's applying. This would be the managing member or the director or someone with the authority, signing authority. A2 is an authorization to release tax information. So this is the applicant allowing us to check the current tax status of the applying entity. So we'll run that through the Ohio Department of Taxation's processes to verify that we're not giving a tax credit to an entity that for some reason has outstanding Ohio taxes. A3 is the project information summary, and most of this information is straightforward, but there's kind of 4 key financial information factors that we're going to ask you for, and the first 2 sometimes trip people up, so I'll explain them. But the total project investments, the first number we're going to ask for, and that's basically every single cost involved with the project from the day you acquire the building or sign a lease for the building through completion, occupation of the building. So that would include acquisition, holding costs, soft costs, construction costs, and even furnishings and fixtures when you occupy it. Remaining investment to complete project basically takes that total project investment and cuts it off at the time that you apply. So it's only the cost moving forward. We don't, because this is what you're going to have to show us financing to. You're going to have to show how you're financing the remaining investment that's left to complete the project. We don't actually ask you to show how you financed what you already have financed or have already taken care of. See, that third number there is the estimated qualified rehabilitation expenditures. These are known as QREs, and they are the same for both the Ohio and the federal program. And that's how the tax credit is calculated. And then that fourth number would be the optic amount requested, the amount of tax credits are requested, which will usually be 25% of the QREs, that's the limit, up to $5 million, although it could be less if you require less for the project. And then A4 is just a description and scope of the project, which is pretty straightforward. A5 is where you're going to document that the applying entity is the owner or a long-term tenant, that basically they have leaseholder interest in the property. If you're an owner, you're going to give us a property deed, an auditor's card, or executed closing documents for all the parcels that the building or the buildings are contained on. If you're in a qualified lessee situation, we want to see an executed lease agreement. There can be some clauses in there, basically, that if you don't get the tax credit, that the lease could be validated. But there is a minimum requirement for residential property that the lease be a term of 27.5 years or more, or 39 years for non-residential. And this basically is tailored around the federal program and how qualified lessee is required to be eligible for that program. A6 is major factor. Some of you may be aware that there's basically a but-for in the legislation for this tax credit. So applicants have to make the argument that the tax credit is a major factor in their decision to do the project, or a major factor in their decision to increase investment. So if you're applying under the major factor, kind of the more straightforward chain, you're going to make the argument that the tax credit is a major factor. You can explain why it's a major factor, and then tell us that you have not started work beyond something like stabilization if you needed to put a roof on, or fix a window, something to keep water out, those kind of things, or environmental abatement. That's something we allow you to do prior to submitting an application. But you're basically making the statement that tax credit's a major factor, and the proof is that we cannot move forward with the project and have not moved forward until we get approval. Increased investment, that scenario is a little more complicated, and we'll talk through that at the pre-application meeting if you're approaching that. But basically, you can't be more than 25% through your QREs. You'd have to make the commitment to increase investment in the project and something tangible, and commit that remaining 75% of QREs. And then A7 is just documentation that you did hold those pre-application meetings. Following a pre-application meeting, you would get emailed basically a confirmation that the pre-application meeting was had. I'll automatically email it to you after you meet with me. The Ohio Historic Preservation Office, you'll want to contact your tax credit reviewer that you met with, request that from them. You just include a copy of that email within the application. Section B, this is probably a shorter part of the application, but it represents the maybe bigger part of the entire process. B1 is the historic building designation, and that's where you indicate to us how the building is eligible, how it meets the definition of a historic building. And I know I mentioned this up front with the pipeline, but with the OPTIC Ohio program, historic designation must be effective by the application date. So if you have a property that's being locally listed by a CLG and council has approved the ordinance, but it's not effective for 30 days, and that 30-day time is past the date that applications must be submitted, you wouldn't be eligible. So you want to make sure that your National Register nomination, has gone through and you've been listed, or your local designation is effective on the date of the application. If you have a CLG listing, there's a little more documentation that we require if it's only eligible because of CLG. For an individual property, we want to see a signed and dated ordinance establishing that listing. If it's within a historic district, we want to see a signed and dated ordinance, again establishing that listing, a boundary map to show what the boundaries of that historic district are, and we want a letter from the CLG contact person, and there's a contact person affiliated with every CLG, indicating that that property does contribute to the significance of that historic district. B2 is the historic rehabilitation information. So there's a couple routes you can take with this. If you're doing a state-only project, so you're not going after the federal credit, we would call that OPTIC only. There's an Ohio Parts 1 and Parts 2 form. It's one form. It combines basically the information that's in the federal Part 1 and Part 2. Those are two separate forms. You can give us that whole form, or if you've already submitted that form to the Preservation Office, you just give us a cover sheet from that form. If you're doing a combined state and federal rehab using the federal historic credit, you don't have to fill out the Ohio Parts 1 and 2 form. You're only going to fill out the federal forms. There's a federal Part 1, which may not be applicable to all projects, and there's a federal Part 2. And we're just asking for the cover sheets. So you send those federal forms to the Preservation Office, not to our department, the Office of Redevelopment. And you just give us the cover sheets to document that you have submitted those. And we encourage you, even if you haven't submitted your development application, to submit these as early as possible to the Preservation Office. The more time that they have to go over your Part 1 and Part 2 can really be helpful. And they have a 2.5 month turnaround to turn around these. And if they have a complete Part 2, they're very efficient at turning that around. But sometimes there's questions, and it just helps to get those in early, so that they have time to get back to you, and you have time to provide the information. Section C is the scoring criteria. So I'm going to go through this a little more detailed, and Section C is broken into really two sets of criteria. The first being regional distributed balance. This is 30 out of the 100 points. It's 5 questions, and the first two look at where the project's at and how many OPTIC awards have been there. So C1 is jurisdictional balance, and that's where we give priority to jurisdictions, so cities, villages, townships, that have had the fewest previous OPTIC awards. So we have an appendix in the back that you can reference. It tells you how many projects have been in your jurisdiction and then what your score would be. Pretty similar with C2, which is county per capita balance. That's where we prioritize counties that have, or buildings that are in counties that have the lowest per capita OPTIC awards based on the dollar amount of the tax credits we've granted. So again, there's an appendix that will tell you what's been awarded. Look at the 2010 population of the county, the per capita awards, and tell you what that county point score would be. C3 is benefit to low income and jurisdiction. So this is where we're prioritizing cities, villages, townships that have the highest poverty rates to complete projects in. So we're looking at census data. You may be familiar in the past if you've applied. We were always looking at 2000 census data, but a lot has changed in Ohio communities. Some have gone up, some have gone down. So we're now looking at the 2011 American Community Survey 5-year estimate. So that'd be a 2006 to 2011 estimate. You'd use the U.S. Census Bureau's American Fact Finder website to find that data. Within the application, we have pretty straightforward, I think, instructions to help walk you through that. If you have trouble, just give me a call and we'll locate that information. C4 is benefit to low income in the census tract. So it's identical to the last question, although we're looking on the census tract level, so the rubric's a little different, but you'd look at the same website for that information. C5 is benefit to unemployment in counties. So we're going to look at what's the unemployment rate in your county relative to the state average unemployment. So we're going to prioritize counties that have higher unemployment than the state average. And we have an appendix with that information that's provided by the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services. And we're looking at the data from December 2012 because that's the most recent data we have to date. C6 is leveraged investment, and I should say this is starting off criteria B, which is the potential economic impact scoring criteria. These items are things you can really change. Some of them you can really change to improve your project. So you're not going to move your historic building to an area with higher poverty or higher unemployment, but you could change factors about your project to increase your score in this section. So leveraged investment is where we're going to prioritize projects that leverage additional private investment beyond the QREs, basically. So you're going to take your total project investment, divide it by the tax credit you're requesting, and that'll spit out a ratio. So it's a 25% tax credit. All of our projects are going to have a 1-to-4 ratio, or we're looking at projects that are going to generate additional investment beyond that is not eligible for the tax credit. So if you've got a project that has a lot of costs that aren't qualified expenditures, or you've got landscaping or parking lots or additions or things like that, that might help you. C7 is financing secured, and that's 15 points. That's really a significant indicator for us. There's 2 questions that are 15% of the application each, and those are really factors that drive who gets funded and who doesn't. So this is something you really want to work on. But this is where we prioritize projects with the greatest amount of financing in place when they submit the application. So we're going to ask you to document every funding source you have lined up. We're going to ask you to lay those out basically in a chart, sum it up so we can get a percentage of financing that's in place. We're going to give you the state historic credit and the federal credits at their full value, so we're not going to there's not going to be an equity reduction there based on you may not get the full value of the tax credits when you actually syndicate or realize the tax credit at the end of the project. But we're going to give you the full value, so you're probably going to, if you're using both programs, come in 40 to 45% funded, and you want to show us the gap, basically. I want to talk a little bit about documentation for financing secured, because this is where we usually have the most questions. We send out the most secure letters during the process. If you're wanting to document private financing from a bank or some type of private lender, you'd want to submit either a term sheet or an executed loan agreement or a commitment letter. And commitment letter is, it's a hard commitment. It's not just a letter of interest. They've done their due diligence when they're signing that. Public financing, there's a broad array of what these could be. So there's a broad array of how you can document it. If you have specific questions, we should talk about that in a pre-application meeting or at another point. But it could be an ordinance from a city council or a commission approving funding, a development agreement with the municipality, an approval letter, a commitment letter from some state or federal funding source, things like that. We do have specific financing requirements that are spelled out in the application if you're using new markets tax credits, if you're using a HUD-insured loan, or if you're using the 4% or the 9% low-income housing tax credit programs through OFA. Developer equity, if you're got a developer who's putting their dollars into the project, we'd want a commitment letter with a dollar amount from the developer, as well as documentation from their bank or their accountant verifying that those funds are available and they're unencumbered, basically they can be used to do the project. All right, so moving on, C8 is timeliness to completion, and this is where we prioritize projects that are going to move a little quicker. So with historic tax credits, both state and federal, you can choose a 24-month non-stage window or a 60-month stage project. With the stage, you can actually claim tax credits after project phases. So usually that's why someone would go with that kind of schedule. But we'd ask you to provide a project schedule, whether you go either route to document that you can get it done within 24 or 60 month, or why you would need 60 month. C9 is physical scope and construction jobs. basically we're measuring how many construction jobs can be created by prioritizing larger buildings, larger projects. And so we're going to look at the total square feet of the project. It could be the rehabilitated building. It could also be additions or infill if that's part of a larger project. So we're going to ask you to provide a site plan, an auditor's card, a letter from the architect. It could be the cover sheet of architectural drawings scaled down that would have the basically third-party documentation of the square feet included. C10 is local participation and support, and this is where we're going to prioritize projects that have support from the local jurisdiction or the county. And there's really 3 levels that can be demonstrated here. So you want to maximize the type of support you have from your local jurisdiction to maximize the points you can get. So 5 points would be for financial commitment. If you have a tax abatement, a grant, a loan, some type of infrastructure, streetscaping investment, that can be quantified. You could document that, make the case that there's a financial commitment, and that value has to be 3% of the remaining investment or greater. Resolution of support would be the second level, and this is City Council or a County Commission passing an ordinance that your project is a priority for the jurisdiction, or a letter of support could be submitted, and that would be just 1 point. C11 is vacant property, and this is another significant indicator for us, 15% of the points. This is where we prioritize vacant or underutilized properties, and we look at 1 year before the date the application was submitted. So that would be April 2nd, 2012 for this upcoming round, and we ask you to provide either a table of vacancy or a statement if the building is 100% vacant. C12 is the cost-benefit analysis and job commitments. This is the last question. Job commitments is not necessarily commitments for jobs, but commitments for tenants already in place. So we'd prioritize projects that have those tenants lined up or a portion lined up, and we'd ask for executed leases or tenant commitment letters to verify that. If it's a residential property, we'd ask for a commitment letter from a developer. The cost-benefit analysis portion is where we prioritize projects with the greatest return on investment, ROI, of state and local taxes. So we're going to ask a lot of economic data from you. How many construction jobs are going to be created, how many operations jobs people are going to be in the building afterwards, what are the rents and sales going to be in the building, if there's going to be tenants in the building, residential tenants, what are they going to earn, what kind of income tax will they generate. All right, and I'm trying to hurry up here. I know we're getting close to 2. So top jurisdictional score, these are a couple of scoring policies I want to talk about really quickly, but the highest scoring application from every jurisdiction, every city, township, village in a round would receive the full points for the first 2 questions. So you could potentially gain back up to 11 points in this question. And this is how we really provide regional distribution in each round. So the top scoring application from each city in each round is going to have a fair chance. Small projects allocation, this is a set aside we have of 5% of the allocation we have each round that's specifically targeted towards small projects. The small project is a project that's $1 million or under in QREs, but it also means that it also requires that it be a substantial rehab. So it's a small project because it's a small building or smaller building. And those small projects compete for that funding before they go in the larger pool and compete against the larger projects that might score better. All right, so probably everyone's asking, what is a good score? I get this question all the time, and basically it depends on the competition in the round that you come in. Typically I tell people if you're scoring in the 70s or 80s, you should feel comfortable. You still want to maximize your score, but 70s or 80s are usually a comfortable place to be. There's a minimum of 50 points, and we saw the last 2 rounds, our cutoffs were in the 60s. So in round 9, everything 62 and above got funded. In round 8, everything 65 and above. So you really want to work to get into the upper 60s, into the 70s, and talk with our office. And we've also got a few tips on this next slide about what you might want to do to improve your score. So if you want to increase your score, these are kind of intuitive things you can do based on how our scoring is set up. And we have what I think is a transparent scoring process, so these should be easy to pick out. But you want to have all your financing in place, or as much financing in place as you can when you choose to apply. We have these rounds every 6 months, so it doesn't hurt to spend 6 months developing your project and laying an application if it's going to be more competitive. having all your tenants in place, the application is going to help you. It's also probably going to help you get financing. You want to gain the highest level of support possible from your local jurisdiction. So sometimes we get applications and they don't even have a letter of support from their local city, and I think it should be easy to get that unless there's not support from local jurisdiction. But just as easy, or not just as easy, but somewhat easy. It shouldn't cost your jurisdiction too much to pass an ordinance approving your project, and I know that can maybe go through some hoops to get on council dockets and those kind of things, but I can get you a couple extra points, so to be sure to do that if you don't have the financial commitment. You want to ensure that your cost-benefit analysis impacts are maximized, so don't leave anything out of that. Give us every sales tax that's going to be generated, every job that's going to be in the building. Don't make anything up. It should be real, but also don't leave anything out and discount yourself. You also could take the strategy to request less tax credit than you're allowed, than the 25%, which would allow you to increase your leverage investment. I highly caution this. You only want to do this if you can still complete the project. So I've only seen people do this if they want to, if taking off a few $1,000s gets them to a next level in that scoring rubric, or if they have a lot of the financing sources lined up, they're ready to go, they just have a small gap that they want to fill, and so they want to make sure that they're approved and they can move forward, and they might take that strategy. So again, be careful with that last one. All right, so with that, thank you. That was a lot to throw at you at one time. Again, both Barb and I are here to help you. I know I like to be accessible, so please call, email me. We'll be looking forward to setting up those pre-application meetings. If you would like to send me a draft of an application or a copy of documentation that you're preparing, you want me to take a look at it, I'm happy to do that, as long as you get it to me early enough. It's not the last couple of days before the applications are coming in, but we're always happy to help you through the process. So please feel free to reach out to us, and thanks again for joining us today. So I think with that, if there's any questions, Devin's going to facilitate that again.
And thank you both, Barb and Nathaniel, for agreeing to this today, as well as the Office of Redevelopment and the Ohio Historic Preservation Office. If you have any questions now, please send them in. If you have to take off for lunch, you can send a question in and we'll get it answered, and you can listen to the recording later. I'll be probably posting that this evening, so it should be available tomorrow, and I'll send everyone an email to that link as well. Before we take any questions, I just have a quick message. This presentation was made possible in part through AmeriCorps grant funding, through Serve Ohio, Ohio's Commission on Service and Volunteerism, and the Corporation for National and Community Service. Also, just one plug for Heritage Ohio here. If you have any interest in learning more about small tax credit projects for the Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit, Nathaniel will be doing a presentation at our conference here in Columbus on May 23rd. All right, we have one question from Thomas. Thomas is asking, is the tax credit an offset against taxes owed? If no state tax is due, will the credit generate a refund?
All right, that's a good question. The Ohio program, we're really fortunate that it is a refundable credit. So if there's not an entity that's able to take the tax credit against their liability, there's a refund of up to $3 million available. There's some scenarios, that definitely small projects where you want to pursue that, but a large project, it may be more lucrative to bring in an investor who would have that liability, because it is, if it comes in as a refund, it could be taxed federally the following year. So the short answer is yes, it could be a refund, but we can talk through that more with you and help you understand that.
Thanks, Nathaniel. Denise has a question. Does the Brownfield revolving loan application qualify towards the financing?
I think you're talking about the program in our office. If the application had been approved, so you have been awarded funding, it would qualify. So just the pursuit of an application wouldn't be enough, but going through those approvals and having the loan in place could count, definitely.
Beth is asking, previous QREs were limited to hard costs. Are soft costs now included in this?
All right. QREs are the same as the federal program, so it could include soft cost, architectural, engineering, consultant fees, those kind of things.
Jeanette's asking, for the pipeline pilot application, should the National Register questionnaire be submitted before the development application?
Well, I'll let Barb talk a little bit about that. It's always helpful to do that. Project types C and D require that. Project types A and B don't necessarily require that, but it could be helpful.
Yes, as Nathaniel just mentioned, for the A and B, you can type A and B projects. You can submit your questionnaire at the same time as you're submitting the application development piece. Again, we review questionnaires on a weekly basis. We'd like to have a quick turnaround to get back to you, but if we have any questions, we will have to ask those, and you'd have to respond back. So I think with all these, if you have any questions or any hesitation about the property you're dealing with, contact our office, contact the Ohio Historic Preservation early on, and we can talk through how best to approach your project or how best to provide and what kind of information we're going to be looking for. We really want, our goal is to have successful National Register nominations that open up these opportunities for reinvestment and rehabilitation. So we are happy to talk with you at any time about the project and how best to approach it.
Thank you, Barb. Beth has another question. Can letters of support be from the City Council, the Mayor, the City Manager, or community organizations?
All right, that's a good question. It needs to be from somebody affiliated with the city or township or village government. So it could be council, mayor, city manager. It could be a planning director, an economic development professional. Probably not a community organization, though.
Thank you, Nathaniel. If you have any final questions, please send them in. Also, since this is a very complex topic, I'm sure that both Barb and Nathaniel will be happy to answer any questions you have later this evening or tomorrow or even next week. Well, we're not seeing any more questions coming in, so thank you all for attending today. And once again, thanks both to Barb and Nathaniel for doing the webinar today. Our next webinar is March 6th. Have a good day, and thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks.